My name is Regina. Standing here now, I still remember the moment when I brought that arrogant man to his knees with a single clap. The panicked look on his face, the shouts of pain, and the shocked expressions of the investors. It was like a scene out of a movie. But let me take you back to the beginning. I'm an acoustical architect. Some might think it's just about choosing curtains or wall colors, but they're completely wrong. I work with sound, making it dance and flow through spaces. I was born into a family with a deep-seated love for the arts. My father was a classical musician, and my mother was an interior designer. They always encouraged my curiosity about the world of sound and gave me the freedom to explore. I had been working on the Royal Symphony Hall project for 4 long years. It was supposed to be the crowning achievement of my career, a 2,000-seat concert hall designed for unamplified orchestral music. Every curve of the walls, every piece of wood, and every air pocket was carefully calculated by me. I hand-selected the walnut for the stage floor because it had the perfect resonance for cello frequencies. I designed the strange, jagged ceiling diffusers to scatter sound evenly. This hall was my baby, my symphony in the making. Then there was Mr. Grant. He was 55 years old, a wealthy property developer. He came from a family of businessmen, and his parents instilled in him an over-inflated sense of self-importance. He thought money could buy anything, including the laws of physics. He owned the land, the building, and unfortunately, my contract. He was a broad-shouldered man who always wore suits that cost more than my annual salary. Whenever he entered a room, it felt like an invasion. Grant hated me for several reasons. I was only 28, young and full of new ideas. I was also a woman in a field he thought was dominated by middle-aged men. But most of all, I had the audacity to tell him no. When he wanted to use cheap, hollow drywall to cut costs, I said no. When he insisted on glass panels everywhere because they looked modern, I also said no. Glass is a sound killer, turning every note harsh and brittle. He took every one of my refusals as a personal attack. The final inspection day arrived, and it was a nightmare from the start. Grant had invited 12 major investors, the elite circle as he called them. These were billionaires, hedge fund managers, and tech moguls who bought islands for a hobby. He needed them to invest in his next project, a massive skyscraper downtown, and he wanted to look like the in-charge genius. And what better way to do that than to make me look small? The tour began at 8 a.m. By 9 a.m. I was a bundle of nerves. We were in the lobby, which had polished marble floors. Marble is terrible for acoustics, but I had made this compromise to ensure the main hall was perfect. Grant stomped his heel on the floor and boasted, "Look at this shine. It's Italian, imported." Then he turned to the investors with a grin and said, "This girl here wanted to put down carpet. Can you believe carpet in a grand entrance? She has the taste of a schoolgirl." The investors, all older men, just chuckled and followed his lead. I softly explained, I actually recommended a high-density cork blend. It absorbs foot traffic noise, so the ticket area won't be chaotic. Grant waved me off like a pesky fly. Boring. Nobody cares about foot traffic noise. They care about grandeur. That's why I'm the boss and you're the worker. And with that, he marched them away, and I followed, trailing behind with my thick binder of data that no one seemed interested in. By 11 a.m. We entered the main auditorium, the heart of the building. The warm-toned cherry wood walls, the plush velvet seats in a deep burgundy, and the 50-foot-high ceiling with my acoustic clouds made it a sight to behold. I felt a surge of pride, thinking that even Grant couldn't ruin this perfection. But I was wrong. Grant stopped in the center aisle and looked up at the ceiling diffusers. These were the panels I had spent weeks calculating. They were like abstract sculptures floating in the air. "Ugly, aren't they?" he said to the group. One investor squinted up and asked, "What is that?" Looks like construction debris you forgot to clear out. Grant laughed his barking laugh. That's her so-called art. I told her we needed big crystal chandeliers, but she insisted on this trash for the sake of acoustics. She gets so emotional about these shapes. I let her keep them just to shut her up, but I'm tearing them down next month and putting up real lights. I stepped forward, unable to hold back. Mr. Grant, those panels are essential. They prevent standing waves. Without them, the bass notes will trap in the upper vault and create a muddled sound. He snapped at me, quiet. Nobody asked for a physics lecture. We're talking about aesthetics, something you clearly know nothing about. Then he kicked the baseboard of a seat. I said, my voice trembling slightly, these baseboards are solid mahogany, for density. He declared, they look cheap. Remind me to fire the supplier. As we continued the tour, he interrupted me at every turn. At the dressing rooms, 4 times. At the orchestra pit, 8 times. On the main stage, 15 times. By the time we reached the balcony, he had interrupted me 27 times. I kept counting in my head to stop myself from screaming. He called me sweetie, a decorator trying to be an engineer, and even told the investors that I was a diversity hire that his legal team forced him to take on. He said, as we walked up the grand staircase to the balcony, she's good with the small details, I guess, but she doesn't understand structure. We had to make some executive decisions to fit more seats in. That's business, gentlemen. You squeeze every bit of value out of the square footage. I froze on the stairs. Fit more seats in? I hadn't been on to site for the last 3 weeks. I had been at a factory in France overseeing the manufacturing of the stage shell. I had only flown back last night. The geometry of the hall was a fixed mathematical equation. You couldn't just add seats, the volume of air per person had to be exact for the reverberation time to be right. When we entered the VIP section, the royal box at the back of the hall overlooking the stage, I stopped dead in my tracks. The rear wall was all wrong. It wasn't the specialized porous maple I had specified, and the angle was off. The original design called for a 12 degrees forward tilt and a jagged diffusing pattern to prevent sound from bouncing straight back to the stage and causing an echo. But this wall was a flat, smooth, polished veneer, curved in a way that was completely wrong. I pulled out my laser measure from my belt. My hands were shaking as I aimed it at the wall and then at the focal point on the stage. He had changed the radius, pushing the wall back about 4 feet to squeeze in a second row of VIP chairs. To fit it into the existing steel frame, he had tightened the curve, creating a parabolic reflector. A parabola collects energy, not scatters it. I quickly calculated in my head. The sound from the stage would hit this new wall and be focused right at the center seat in the front row, the founder's seat. A hard concave surface like this could amplify sound by a factor of 10, maybe 20, or even more if the curve was perfect. And it looked terrifyingly precise. Grant, standing by the railing with his arm around a silver-haired investor, shouted at me, "Stop playing with your toys and come over here. We're wrapping up." I walked over, my legs feeling numb. The air in the hall was thick with his arrogance. He announced to the investors, "We've seen the place. It has potential. Yes, we'll do some clean up next month, rip out most of her art to add the extra seats I promised you. But the bones are good, and the location is prime." Then he sat down in the founder's seat, crossing his legs and leaning back like a king on a throne. One of the investors asked, "What about the acoustics?" I heard this place was designed for high-end sound. Grant laughed his deep, chesty laugh. "Good. It's loud. That's what matters. Can you hear the music?" "Yes." "Is it perfect?" "Who cares? Perfection is for those who don't need to make money. We cut some corners, but look at this view." He then turned to me with a cruel smirk. "I'll give you a chance, Regina. You've been sulking all morning. You have 3 minutes. Convince these gentlemen why they should care about your curves and wood density. The investors gave a polite, dry laugh. I stood on the plush carpet of the balcony aisle, looking at the wall behind him and his smug face. He had no idea that he had built a weapon and was sitting right in the crosshairs. I don't need 3 minutes. I only need one sound, I said. My voice was quiet, but in that well-designed, almost silent room, it carried. I walked to the edge of the balcony railing and said, "You changed the angle of the rear wall by 4 degrees. You did it while I was away last month. You wanted another row of VIP seats. I told you in my reports that the geometry of this room is a precise equation. You can't change one variable without breaking the whole thing." Grant rolled his eyes and checked his watch. "Here comes the math lesson. Boring. Wrap it up." He looked at the investors and said, "I improved it. I added 10 seats at $5,000 a ticket. That's $50,000 a night. That's smart business." The investors nodded. Money made more sense to them than physics. I pointed at his chair and said, "You insisted on sitting there, the founder's seat, wanting to be the center of attention." He leaned forward, his face red with arrogance. "I am the center of attention. I'm the reason we're all here, and I'm the reason you have a job." I smiled for the first time that day. "Yes, you are." Then I looked at the investors. "Gentlemen, I'm going to demonstrate the acoustics of this hall, but first, please cover your ears. If you value your hearing, do it now." One of the investors asked, "Is this a joke?" I replied firmly, "No, if you want to protect your ears, cover them." Slowly, the 12 men raised their hands and clamped them over their ears. Grant, however, sat there, arms crossed, smirking. "I'm not covering my ears. I'm not playing your games. Make your noise, and let's see what you've got." I took a deep breath, turned towards the hard, curved wall behind him, and brought my hands together with a deep, hollow thud. In a properly tuned hall, that sound would have spread evenly. But in this hall, the sound wave hit the rear wall, and the parabola did its job. The sound was focused back to the point where Grant's head was, hitting him like a physical blow. He jumped out of his seat, shouting, "What did you throw at me?" I calmly said, "I didn't throw anything." He was rubbing his ear, his face turning red. Something hit me in the head. The investors, standing just 10 feet away, only heard a dull thud because they weren't at the focal point. Grant yelled, "Liar. Do it again." I stepped closer to the focal zone and looked him in the eye. "You really should have read my report." I spoke in a normal tone, but the wall behind him caught my voice and amplified it right into his ear. He flinched and shouted, "Stop shouting." I replied, "I'm speaking normally. Don't you understand the geometry?" I continued to explain, "Sound is energy. Usually, we architects try to spread it evenly, but you wanted to keep it all for yourself. You created an acoustic singularity." He slid out of the chair onto his knees, screaming, "Make her stop." I turned to the investors. "Gentlemen, imagine if the orchestra was playing right now. A single cymbal crash could rupture the eardrums of anyone sitting in this seat. Instant, permanent hearing loss, balance issues, even a potential brain hemorrhage. And you're selling these tickets for $5,000? One of the investors, a tall man with glasses, asked, "Is this permanent?" I replied, "As long as that wall is curved at that angle, yes. The building is like a loaded gun pointed at the VIP section. To fix it, you'd have to tear down the rear structural wall, the load-bearing spine, rip out the steel framing and concrete. It would cost more than the original construction budget." Grant looked up at me, his face red and sweating, and wheezed, "You set me up." I said, "I warned you. I sent you emails and put it in the reports. You called my calculations garbage and told me to learn from the money men. I dropped my clipboard on the floor, and the amplified sound made him scream and cover his head. I walked out of the hall, leaving the stunned investors and the defeated Grant behind. The aftermath was swift. The investors left just 5 minutes later. They didn't need to see any more. They knew the building was flawed. The word negligence was being thrown around before they even reached the parking lot. Grant tried to fight it, but physics was on my side. 3 weeks later, he declared bankruptcy. The investors sued him for gross negligence and fraud, taking everything he had left. He tried to blame me in court, but I simply showed the date he signed the order to change the wall against my advice and the clause stating that altering the rear curvature would cause catastrophic acoustic focusing. He lost. Now, I'm the woman who broke a billionaire with a clap. When I walk into a meeting, no one interrupts me. And when I ask for silence, I get it. It was a hard-fought victory, but it was worth it. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about the hidden power of sound.